Hey podcast listeners, a quick heads up about the RCR AI Conference 2026. Join the radiology and imaging community on the 29th and 30th of June in London for 2 days focused on how artificial intelligence is shaping the future of medical imaging and clinical practice. The conference brings together clinicians, radiographers, researchers and industry to explore real-world applications of AI, policy considerations and what's coming up next for the profession. And if you're an AXREM member, don't forget about those exclusive AXREM discounts. Welcome to AXREM Insights, developing healthcare through medtech and innovation. Join Melanie Johnson and Sully Edgington as they talk with our industry leaders and experts.
Hello and welcome to AXREM Insights, our patient safety podcast. I'm Melanie Johnson and I'm here with Anna Vaughan, AXREM's future leader representative and senior account manager at Varium. Today we have the pleasure to be speaking to Linda Carruthers, Head of Radiotherapy at the Edinburgh Cancer Centre. Welcome Linda and thank you for being on the show today. Now let's get started by handing over to you to tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your story and how did you end up here today?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much for having me today. My name is Linda Carruthers and I'm the Head of Oncology Physics, as we call it in Edinburgh. I started basically in my career in medical physics, partly by not knowing anything about it, if I'm honest. And during my physics degree, somebody said to me, there's this thing called medical physics. I'm going to find out about it. Do you fancy coming along? And I just thought, well, why not? But then very quickly realized that was something that I wanted to get into. So after joining and going through the training scheme as a clinical scientist, I've moved to various different jobs and taken on more and more responsibility, becoming head of department here in Edinburgh in about 2016. And so, yeah, I've been lucky to have those opportunities to progress. I think what's brought me here today is more some of the national work that I've been involved in and procurement and looking particularly at the Scottish fleet of radiotherapy equipment. And that's really heightened my involvement in specification and technical evaluation of equipment, and then, our building relationships with suppliers, etc., and understanding the interaction between customers and suppliers.
Oh, great. Thank you. Super for that. So just obviously moving on slightly so we can kind of get into the detail and obviously you can elaborate on that further. Patient safety isn't just a regulatory requirement, it's the heartbeat of effective care delivery. As we navigate challenges across the NHS, from outdated technology to rising demand, the role of innovation and collaboration becomes even more critical. So today I'd really like to explore how industry expertise, technological advancements and communities like AXREM can collectively strengthen patient safety standards in imaging and diagnostics and the wider healthcare sector. It's really over to you, Anna. Over to your question.
Thanks, Mel. Hi, Linda. So the first question I have for you is, how has the management of patient safety changed during your time in clinical leadership?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I mean, I think there's been really quite astronomical changes throughout my career in patient safety. And, radiotherapy itself is very technologically driven. And I think the huge advances in technology over those years have had a significant impact on patient safety. It's now quite difficult to actually do something that's unintended, and you have to go through quite a lot of safety mechanisms to do that. So that in itself is definitely one of the big advantages, I think. And how have we got there, I think, is around sort of openness and a learning culture that we've adopted through various different things, learning a lot. As you know, the basis of a lot of radiotherapy safety came from the airline industry, and really recognizing that actually radiotherapy is very safe in general, but when things go wrong, they can, sometimes go quite significantly wrong. So it's a bit analogous to airline travel being one of the safest forms of travel, but, we all hear about it if there is an issue that happens within the airline industry. And I think one of the other big key things that's happened over those years is a change in the multidisciplinary dynamic within radiotherapy. So going back to when I first started a long time ago, there was very much more of a hierarchy that maybe the doctor had full control over everything. The physicists were sort of there to serve the doctors, and the radiographers, well, they were delivering the treatment, but, that was kind of where their input stopped. As you fast forward to where we are now, we truly recognise that none of us can deliver radiotherapy by ourselves. We've all got something to bring to the table, and we've all got quite different skills. And I think the overlap of those has really evolved over those years, but that also means that none of us are the expert in anything, which we never really were. But recognizing that, say, it's the therapeutic radiographer that's actually going to be pressing the button there. They're going to be the one who's actually going to irradiate those patients, and they have to have full confidence in all the other things that have come beforehand to be able to deliver that as safely as they possibly can. And recognizing that that's not just something, a sort of tick box exercise. It's a really, really important part of delivery of safe radiotherapy. So I think they're the main changes that have happened. And I've got a good example of that kind of multidisciplinary working actually from my own experience, whereby we were introducing a new treatment within Edinburgh, and we'd employed a physicist to come and work the technique up, and they'd done loads of great scientific work. They'd run example plans on the LINAC, etc. They'd written the documentation, and we were ready to go. We got our first patient in, a really good compliant patient, got them on the bed, and we fell almost at the first hurdle because the physicist had mocked up the treatment in the way that they thought the radiographers would treat them, which wasn't the way that it was done. So the first thing was, well, we don't treat like that. And then we hit a technological barrier where the equipment couldn't respond in the way that we wanted it to at that time. And so we actually ended up treating one patient and then taking another 6 months to iron out some of those issues. So that kind of learning process is then fed into whenever we're introducing something new, whether it's a change all the way through to a brand new technique or a huge piece of equipment, thinking about that end-to-end test process, not just that an end-to-end test has been done, but that end-to-end test has been done by the people who would be doing it in real life on a patient, and treating that end-to-end test as close as possible as a dry run that you could actually do with the patient. And that's brought huge insight into that start to finish of that patient pathway, and highlighted some things we've changed and been able to put in place before we've gone ahead and treated a patient. So I think they're kind of the main sort of changes that I've seen, as I say, over the time that I've been working here in Edinburgh Cancer Centre.
Fantastic. Thanks, Linda.
Yeah, great. I quite liked your comparison around the whole airline patient safety. I'd never really thought of that before, but actually, no, it does kind of like resonate. As I say, it's a catastrophic repercussions if anything goes wrong. So yeah, no, I love that, and thank you for sharing that with us. So I suppose really on to the next thing is around the biggest challenges. So what are the biggest challenges you see in a clinical setting around managing and maintaining patient safety?
Yeah, so I think undoubtedly one of the biggest challenges we have is our capacity versus demand. We know that demand is going up all the time for radiotherapy, and we can measure things like demographic and incidence of cancer, and the clinical elements of when radiotherapy might be being used within a patient treatment. One of the things that's quite difficult to quantify and build into capacity and demand models is complexity. And we are almost victims of our own success in the sense that we're able to target radiotherapy so much more effectively now and reduce side effects, that's meaning that patients are living a higher quality life, potentially for longer, but also then able to tolerate additional treatments. And so if we have a patient who's come in for a treatment and then they come in a year later for another treatment, that's not doing two separate radiotherapy plans. It's more work than that, because you have the two separate radiotherapy plans, but you also then have to give real consideration to the impact of the first one on the second, and the compromise with that requires a lot of interaction. Again, requires quite a lot of input from the physics team as well as the medical team and the radiographers. And that complexity matrix is something which is very difficult, I think, for us to keep up with. And we're also moving towards, there aren't any simple radiotherapy treatments anymore. So again, there was a perception really that some tumor sites were a bit easier, if you like, to treat than others, but most of these are now becoming very complex in their own right. So that complexity is one of the main parts. I think one of the other big challenges is the rate of change that we have in radiotherapy. So as I said before, we're very technologically driven, and that those increases in, or the changes in technology, can also help us with that complexity. So trying to deliver highly complex radiotherapy on one of the new machines is a lot easier than delivering it on one of the older machines, undoubtedly, because the workflows and the even the speed of the technology, the processing power has caught up with some of the things that we're doing. But it's also new learning for everybody for all sorts of different things. And we tend to talk within radiotherapy about categories of tumor types that patients might have. So we might talk about breast radiotherapy, but within breast radiotherapy, there are now so many subsectors of what a treatment might look like, whether we might be doing that in breath hold, whether we be irradiating the nodal area or just the breast or just the chest wall. And so within every tumor site, there's more and more options that we're using clinically, which require different decisions to be taken in advance of the treatment, during the treatment, and after the treatment. So overall, those things are probably the hardest things to manage, along with that pace of change, because we just don't stand still, which I think is one of the things that makes it a really rewarding career to work in, and certainly something which I've loved as I've moved forward. Each time you think you're getting to a point where we're doing things as well as we can, something new comes along. But managing change in an effective way with people who are under pressure and already working at capacity is probably one of the biggest challenges. And maintaining safety around that, again, therefore, is one of the biggest things that we need to take into account when we're planning change within radiotherapy. As I say, even if it's a workflow thing or a new treatment or a new piece of equipment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think as well, just think about what you're saying there. How do you communicate that so well? Obviously, because I suppose with patient safety, there could be a lot of issues around human error as well. So how do you kind of overcome that? How do you communicate all this fast changing technologies and stuff within your departments?
I think the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that human error is a real thing. And again, I suppose that is another part which has changed hugely over the years in terms of recognizing that when somebody makes a mistake, it's not because they're not trained properly or they haven't been paying attention or, they're not very good at their jobs. A lot of the time that a mistake has been almost enabled to happen because the way we've designed our processes and our pathways, really. So I think the whole human factor element that's come in is something which has really allowed us to help staff recognize that when mistakes are made, it's about trying to look for a process change that might stop that from happening again. It's almost like, rather than finger pointing to say to somebody, you made a mistake and this happened, it's a bit like you've identified a place where a mistake could be made. So let's try and work out how we can then go and change what we're doing to minimize the risk of that happening. And I think also that some of the analyses of these errors has come on a long way, because we used to fall into the trap of putting in a safety barrier at the end of a process because that's where we detected it. And so often we detect our errors in radiotherapy on the treatment set when we're actually treating the patient, but actually the fundamental error happened way back in the pathway. And so being able to use some of the well-recognized analysis of errors to be able to identify where's the earliest part in the pathway that we might have been able to do something different that would catch this. So that bit then about translating that into when we're managing change, one of the key things is who are the people that are involved in that change. So again, traditionally, say that the physics team may well have been the ones that said, we're going to make this change and this is how we're going to do it. Go away and do that to the other people. Whereas we've all learned that the most effective way to design something new is co-design, having the right people involved in the right place at the right time, and really developing that listening culture to listen and actually understand why something might be more difficult for somebody further down the line than you thought it was going to be. And we do joke, within radiotherapy that if I plan a plan, the radiographers don't deliver it in the way that I think they're going to, and they don't talk about it in the same way as I talk about it. So we need to translate, even when we're all working in a very niche part of healthcare, we need to translate between each other. So I think the involving the right people at the right place, right time is really important. And then recognizing that we need to make sure that the structures that we have to support that are appropriate. So that may well be documentation. And again, we work obviously in the UK at least, and many of the westernized countries within a quality system environment, and getting that right. So it's not a document which you write once and nobody ever looks at ever again, but it's actually a working document which supports the work on the ground. And more recently, we've translated that actually with the work that we did when Anna and I first were working together, was around our digital workflow. And this is another area where the changes in technology, the changes in use of digital tools has allowed us to build in safety mechanisms, checks and balances, cope with differing circumstances that come up by utilizing those digital workflow tools in the right place at the right time at the point of need. So when you've got these things in place a little bit, it's far easier to bring people along with you, because you can go and demonstrate things to them. You can answer that what about ifs and ands and pots and pans that always come in, and then you can also be a little bit more dynamic in the way that we can react to changes when people say, but we didn't think about that. I think you're right. We didn't think about that element of this. So now we are thinking about it, and we can quite quickly sort of integrate that into our processes. So it's not easy. And we do get people with what I call change fatigue, I think, who are sometimes a bit like, can we not just stand still for 1 minute? But that's part of change management in terms of trying to plan out and be strategic about when you're introducing the new changes and not necessarily doing everything all at once.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Some really nice points covered there, Linda. Really enjoyed the kind of highlighting the no blame culture and the kind of co-creation of processes, which leads me on very well to our next question. So when we think about kind of trying to look at processes and automating processes, this question is a very hot topic. So AI and its implementation into NHS workflows, how do you see it affecting the future of patient safety?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is a really hot topic at the moment, and there's no doubt that AI is exciting in terms of the potential that it has to help us with quite a lot of aspects of healthcare in general and radiotherapy specifically. I also think that we're perhaps at a stage where it's one of those things that everybody's looking at and just sort of saying, AI is going to solve this problem for us, AI is going to be the thing that works this out. But we must never, ever lose sight of the fact that we are treating people, and people are not, and they can't be categorized. We might be quite predictive in some of our behaviors, or maybe some of our anatomy, if you like, but we're inherently people, and we're using people to treat people and design those treatments. And so AI will never be able to replace a radiographer setting up a patient on a treatment couch. They will never be able to replace that part of engaging with the patient, listening and hearing their concerns, and also looking out for what's actually happening with them during treatment, and whether that's through a sort of analysis of some of the things that's going on with them, or the personal touch. So that radiotherapy is inevitably going to be positively influenced by AI. But I also heard a descriptor of it when it was actually about radiology and the use of AI within the diagnostic space. And what they said was that AI will not replace radiologists, but radiologists that use AI will replace radiologists that don't. And I think that's something which I've held quite close to myself as I'm planning out with some of our AI changes that we might make, that overall AI plus human trumps AI alone or human alone. So what we've got to be able to do is be able to use it. But we also must fundamentally understand where its limitations are, where it might fall down, where it's advantageous. But it really will, if we get that right, will give us the real opportunity to be able to use AI most effectively for the things where that kind of individualization, the patient-specific bit of it is less likely to influence it. So we might be able to do some more routine things more quickly, more effectively with AI, but that will then allow us to be able to concentrate our expertise on these ever greater complexity cases, the ones that actually really need more investment of our time, because our time will be better spent, looking at some of those particular complexities. On the other hand, we've also got to recognize that we ourselves are human beings and we can't do highly complex work all day, every day. If you take away all the stuff that we do, which is a little bit lighter in terms of like its toll upon us, even just, some of the jobs we don't like, but sorting through emails or, doing some, for the doctors actually sitting and doing some outlining. If you're only ever asking people to do very, very complex work all day, every day, they're going to burn out really, really quickly. So we're going to have to adapt the way in which we expect our workers to work when we've got AI, but we are going to be able to see, I think, some capacity benefits to it. But we have to have a note of caution in terms of the way that we implement it, the way we understand what it's doing, the way when we see where it might not work. And then also another big key part of it is how it will fit into our governance, particularly working under the ionizing radiation regulations under IRMA, and sort of saying, well, who is the operator now? If it's an AI that's gone and done all of this, who's the practitioner? But we can move with that as a profession. But I think there's a lot of caution that we'll have to have around just securing the responsibility of each of those parts of the pathway like we do at the moment. So I think they're the kind of main issues that we will see with AI. But I mean, probably you'll ask me this question again in even 6 months, and I may have a completely different answer because it's such a fast evolving space that we're working in.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with you there. Anything AI at the moment is just absolutely crazy. It's just the conversation of everything, to be honest. But I think from my perspective, as I say, obviously not working in the NHS, but I've slowly started introducing AI into my everyday work. But it's sensible to be cautious, 100% agree, but I am slowly starting to see the benefits. So I think once you kind of start seeing some benefits, it helps you to kind of build that trust with it. So I think, but I totally agree. As I say, I think it's going to be ever evolving, and it's quite exciting really to see where it will go. I know there is an element of a bit of a worry thinking where will it go, but I also do think that there is a lot of excitement around it, and it is exciting to see where the future goes with it. But yeah, just moving on, and this kind of works quite nicely actually, because we've just been speaking around human and AI collaboration. But I just want to touch on AXREM strategic priorities 25 to 27. So a big part of that highlights patient safety first and foremost. So within all of the special focus group meetings we hold, when we're considering a piece of work, we always bring it back to the patient. Which I think is really important. And I just obviously want to just highlight a piece of work that we've done recently around our radiotherapy patient video. As I say, this was kind of designed by the radiotherapy special focus group, and it's aimed at patients to understand what radiotherapy is and hopefully combat any of those kind of scary myths. So again, obviously, if anybody's going through this at the moment, I would direct you to the AXREM website just to have a little look at that. It is really useful, and hopefully you'll find it useful too. But I think going back to obviously my question I was going to ask is just, what do you think the role of collaborative communities like AXREM in spreading best practices across the trusts should be?
I think there's an important role, and my experience is within radiotherapy, and I would say radiotherapy is unlike some other areas in terms of the relationships that we have with the main manufacturers and vendors, because there's not huge numbers of people out there. And so when we meet with the salespeople, it's not like a sales culture. It's not like a hard sell. It's much more of a partnership, because we're working towards the same thing. That partnership element of it allows us to go a little bit more deeper into the how we're using it and the why we're using it. Being able to learn about things and really think, well, how does my piece of equipment do that? Does that translate? Is that something which only happens with something else? So being able to have genuine collaboration with a view to safety is one of the most important things. So you're transcending the bit that says my piece of equipment's better than your piece of equipment, or it does this or it does that. Is it fundamentally safe and safe for the staff to use? So that's one thing that I think is really important. I think the other thing is when we do get some guidance or publications, so such as recently we've had the Advancing Safer Radiotherapy that was published through the Radiotherapy Board, it's vitally important that the trade people are aware of that and think and use that to inform some of their strategic decision making. And I appreciate that for many of the big companies, the UK is a relatively small part of their market, but that is what we're working under, and being able to assess and highlight where equipment may or may not support those kind of approaches is something, again, which is very important. And thirdly, again, is some of the work that's been done, say, in support of Radiotherapy UK, and just raising the profile of what we do, and that there's a requirement for it so that patients can benefit from it rather than so that more things can be sold, etc. I think is really something which I've really recognised and supported by AXREM as something which is very, very important, that people can leave their company that they work for at the door, but actually go and have a conversation around that. And I listened to one of the previous podcasts that had, I think, some of the people from the Radiotherapy Working Group on it. And it's quite rewarding to hear that professionals who, as I say, are in there essentially to make money, are able to have that kind of collaboration. And if that really is as focused as it can be on how we use equipment and the limitations of it, that in itself is very reassuring to us as staff. And the consequence of that will hopefully be that increase in patient safety.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So just obviously for your awareness, really, I suppose, AXREM at the moment are trying to increase our visibility with clinicians. So we feel like as AXREM, obviously our presence within government, etc., and our government affairs work that we're doing at the moment, we feel like we can really help obviously elevate and amplify the voice of clinician teams as well. So from our perspective, it's really, really key that obviously the NHS colleagues, etc., are liaising with us and making sure we're part of that kind of process. But I suppose we can obviously help shape as well that national safety guidelines as well, and any kind of standards. So we've got that kind of bigger picture, because obviously we're all part of this. It should be a collaborative effort, in my opinion. And I suppose I've just got another question just off that, if that's okay, is what do you think these communities can do to ensure best practice is not just shared, but actually implemented across different trusts? Because I know they act very independently. So what could we do better, I suppose, to make sure it is kind of seen across all trusts?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. It's quite difficult to answer, but on the other hand, there is the bit about visibility, and there's a bit about then translating some of that learning into the products and the pathways that come with it. So I think whilst I was saying that we are able to be relatively customizable, we are able to customize our workflows quite well and quite quickly, we are still working within the parameters of the software that we're using. It's not completely and utterly customizable. And so actually building some of those sorts of things to give us tools which we can then adapt a little bit to our own areas is definitely one of those things. I mean, obviously, we can often just point the finger at resource to say that if a trust can't afford to buy X, Y, or Z, then there's no way that they're going to be able to implement it. So that kind of support with that campaigning for, appropriate technology within healthcare and appropriate replacement, it's vital that we keep our equipment as up to date as we can, not just because we want a shiny new thing or, it's nice to have, but we've spent a lot of time here talking about technological advances and things which can be learned. So we need to be having more up-to-date equipment to be able to have the most up-to-date tools that has embedded that learning within the product that we're actually using. So I think that bit of sort of campaigning about it is important. The rest of it probably is a bit more to do with the community itself to be able to try and work on some of those things. And undoubtedly, that sort of more standardization of approach is something that we are all working towards, partly because we're limited in our resource. We know there's a massive shortage worldwide of clinical oncologists, medical physicists, and therapeutic radiographers. Therefore, we have to use our resources most effectively as we possibly can. And the days of us all being able to do 5 different approaches to something, that it's just not practical anymore, even if people would like to do it. So there's a lot of work that we have to do. But again, being able to make product change requests and being able to have them acted upon, or at least get answered, even if it's not acted upon, even if it's something you can't make a change, but to get an answer from it, they're the sorts of interactions with manufacturers which are really useful to us as clinicians on the ground. So I think they're probably the main ways that kind of the community can help us as clinicians in the actual, cancer centres.
Yeah, no, thank you. Anna, do you have anything to kind of add on that from a supplier perspective at all?
Yeah, completely. I mean, I think the points of kind of standardization of workflows is such an important thing, in making sure that, what the customer needs to use is appropriate and suitable, and, meets the needs of their day-to-day, like, radiotherapy, ultimately scan planning and treating, but there are nuances in each center. So, it's so important that, I guess, as a trade association representation in terms of AXREM, all the manufacturers coming together, listening to the requirements, campaigning for what's needed, campaigning for, what's important. I really think is the be all and end all, really.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, we're going to have a little bit of a change in kind of question now. So I haven't said this for quite a while now. Quirky question time. I'll go to you first, Linda. And Anna, I'm going to come to you next because I want you to answer this as well. So if you could swap brains with any historical figure for a day, who would it be and why?
So again, this is an interesting question, I think. And my first thought was to swap with somebody that, I felt has had some kind of inspiring impact on something which is quite tangible to me. So the person that I first thought of is not particularly historical, in fact, is still alive. It's actually a marathon runner, the first woman to run the Boston Marathon. So a woman called Catherine Switzer, who entered the Boston Marathon in 1979, I think it was, or maybe even before then, I think 1972 it was. Entered just using her initials, got a man to go and collect her bib, etc. Started running with wearing a hoodie, and was running the marathon. Obviously, the hoodie kind of came off, and partway through the marathon, then the course organizer discovered that there was a woman and became so irate that chased after her and tried to rip the bib off her to sort of say, "Give me back my number," and anyhow was fought off, and she went on and completed the marathon. And it was, it's a very inspiring, because there's somebody who's gone to utilize their sort of position to try and make a fundamental change, and it really shook up athletics. But what I was thinking about was changing brains with somebody. What the person I'd actually like to change the brain with is actually the course, organizer on that day, to understand why somebody could be so angry about something, which was that a woman was too fragile to run a marathon. But it wasn't sort of, something that they could get their head around, but to get so angry that you'd want to chase after and try and knock somebody down. Yeah. But then the interesting next part to the story is that they then became friends thereafter. And then women were allowed, not until 5 years later, to actually enter the Boston Marathon. But that process of change that person went through from this position of anger and absolute defiance, that women would not be allowed to enter in, to be able to recognize that it was okay and it's something that should be supported, and actually then to become friends with that person. I think that thinking would be very interesting to experience in real life.
Absolutely. When you first mentioned about the brain of a marathon runner, I was thinking brain, yeah, legs, no. That was my first thought. But no, that's really interesting, actually. I've not heard that story before, so thank you for sharing that. And over to Anna. So who would you like to swap brains with?
So keeping to the theme of the podcast and radiotherapy, I think swapping brains with Marie Curie would be pretty fascinating. Obviously, she's renowned for changing the world, not once, but twice. She obviously founded the science of radioactivity, discovered and launched effective cures for cancer. She won the Nobel Peace Prize twice. which is pretty epic. But really, it's more so as a woman in science. And again, on the theme of, I'm sure it was a tricky time to have been a woman in science and the types of challenges she would have had to come up against and also overcome. I think it would be really interesting to swap brains with her.
Yeah, no, it would be an interesting person, actually. That's a good one. So thank you. It's been great to get to know a little bit more about Linda and get some further insights into how patient safety is dealt with within a clinical setting. A big thank you to Linda for joining us today. Thanks to Anna for being our guest host, and thank you to all the listeners. If you have enjoyed today's podcast, don't forget to hit subscribe or feel free to share the podcast with friends.